Hello and welcome to Faithfully Stampin' with Jennifer Helm. I am Jennifer Helm, the Faithful Stamper and independent demonstrator with Stampin' Up! And today I have for you a fun fold card. This is called an arrow fold card because when you fold the top of the card, you fold it into an arrow shape. So this is a great card. It's a really different look for a card, and it probably looks more complicated than it really is for putting the card together. So I'm going to show you how to make it tonight. This features our Plentiful Plants stamp set and a small piece of the matching Designer Series paper. And I'm going to quick run through the supplies because there aren't many. And that way, if you want to take a screenshot or make some notes really quick and then pause the video and go grab what you need, you can do that. You're going to need a piece of cardstock for your card base that is 5.5 by 8.5. You will need a piece of basic white that is 5 by 4. If you've got a darker color like this, you'll want a second piece in a lighter shade. Here I'm using Crumb Cake that is 5 by 4. And then you will need 2 pieces of Designer Series paper that measure 2.5 by 1 3/4. That's all we need as far as paper materials for making this card. So take a screenshot if you need to, or pause the video and grab what you need, and then come right back and I'll show you how to make this. You will need a scoreboard, a paper trimmer, and a pencil and a ruler. So first up, what we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of cardstock. This is half a sheet of cardstock, 5.5 by 8.5. And you'll need your scoreboard. You're going to need a little room for your scoreboard, but your pencil and your ruler as well. The first thing we're going to do is take our 8.5 by 5.5 piece, turn it so the 8.5 edge is at the top, and then score it at 4 1/4. And then we're going to do some pencil marks. And then I'm going to do all my pencil marks and then I'll go back to my cutter. So you've got your 4 1/4 mark here. Sometimes it's easier if you go ahead and fold your card and then open it back up. First thing you're going to want to do at the very bottom here in the middle, put a mark at 2 3/4. So that's the center point. I'm actually going to flip this over and measure this way. And that way my measure marking is at the edge, so 2 3/4. And then you're going to measure 2 inches up from either side. On that same panel, so they're at the bottom, 2 inches. And just make a little pencil mark, doesn't have to be huge. If it still shows later, we can erase them. So that's all the pencil marks we need to do for this panel. But while we're here and I have my pencil and my ruler out, I'm going to take my 2 pieces of 5 by 4 cardstock. And I'm just going to put a little mark. The 5-inch width goes at the top. So I'm just going to make a center mark at 2.5 on these. It's really going to be at the bottom when we're cutting, but I'll get to that in a minute. This way, again, my mark is just on the bottom where I want it. Okay, so now that's all the bits you need your ruler and your pencil for. So we're going to bring over our card base. So you've got your pencil mark here at the center, and the first thing we're going to do is score from the outer corners here at the center down to the midpoint. I love my paper trimmer scorer because I can just line up my score line at the corner and my pencil mark, and then when I have it exactly where I want it, close my arm and use my scoring blade. And then I'm going to come in from the other corner and do the same thing. Just make sure they're lined up. So you've made basically the letter V. Now what you're going to do is the same thing, except you're going to start your score line at your 2-inch mark on the side and score down to that midpoint again. Basically here we are creating the arrow fold. If your cardstock is lighter in color, you will have an easier time seeing your pencil marks. That is where I'm struggling a little at the moment. This is garden green that I'm using, so it's a little darker, but just takes a little more finagling. Primarily because I'm trying not to hit my head on the camera. The joys of video. All right, so there is all the scoring I need to do for this piece. Before I go ahead and move my paper trimmer though, I'm going to do a little bit of cutting. So I have these 2 panels of 5x4 cardstock with 2.5 marked at the bottom. So for these, I'm going to cut from the top corners down to that center point. So I'm creating a triangle. So again, I'm just gonna line up my corners and that center pencil mark. So when you're done, you will have a triangle and 2 pieces. So hold on to all those. And then if you need this additional light colored piece of cardstock, you can go ahead and cut that the same way from that top corner down to the bottom. Okay. One last bit of cutting. You have your pieces of designer series paper. These are going to be an accent for the front of our card. I'm going to cut diagonally on these rectangles, but here's the important part. I need to cut one with my design face up and the other with the design face down, because otherwise my shapes are not going to come out right. I will have one shape that fits beautifully on the panel that I want it to, but the other one will be backwards unless I flip it over. So the good news is you will have 2 extra pieces that fit beautifully, so you can create another card. Okay. Now we're all done with our paper trimmer score. So bring that card base back over. And so you're going to flip it open, and we're going to fold in on the first score line, which is the larger ones. And take your time with this. If you're going to bend your cardstock anywhere, it's going to be here. Learn from my mistake here. If you get ahead of yourself, you'll bend your cardstock, and you really don't want to do that. So I just creased on that large one, and then I'm going to fold this other one out. And then I'm going to repeat on the other side. And these smaller ones are where it really wants to bend up here where your arrow point forms. So just keep that in mind and kind of take it gently with that. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're going to revisit this panel of white that we cut. So first thing I'm going to do is I can see my pencil mark here at the bottom, so I'm going to erase that. This is going to be what I stamp for the front of the card, so I'm going to set that to the side for a minute. I'm going to use these 2 pieces and create the inset for the bottom of my card. Now you can leave them plain cardstock if you like, or you can emboss them. So I am going to run them through my embossing folder. I am using the Bark embossing folder, and rather than drag my machine out, I actually did that earlier, so I have 2 panels ready to go. Now, if you have a silicone craft mat, this is the perfect thing to use it for, because it's really important to get adhesive all the way to the edges. And we've got these 3 little corners. The right angle here isn't so difficult, but these little teeny tiny corners, you really want to try to get some glue there. And I'm going to try to do that without making a horrendous mess with my adhesive. But you really want to get glue up in those corners so they don't peel off. And what I find easiest to do for this part is to turn my card sideways and then work with my corners. I want a little bit of a border, but I want to make sure my paper is straight. So by using my corners this way, I have a really good view of how I'm gonna put these panels on. So I'm gonna repeat for the other side. I always like to double check that I'm putting glue on the right side of my cardstock before I make a mistake I can't recover from. So again, I'm just gonna use that corner to line up and get this piece as straight as possible. Now, before we go any further, I'm gonna get my stamping done. So for the inside of my card, I'm gonna use this piece of crumb cake. The trick is to make sure your 5 inches are across the top. It won't fit if you turn it the other way. See how that doesn't fit right? So you really want to make sure you've got that wide angle up at the top. And so I'm just going to double check that here. I need my Stampin' Pierce mat because I'm using a photopolymer stamp set tonight. That Plentiful Plants is great because it's clear photopolymer. So for the inside, I'm going to take Garden Green ink and stamp my sentiment. Now, one thing to note here is you do not have a lot of room to write. You can't write a novel in here. So if you might not want this design if you know you're gonna write a lot of a message in your card. But it's great for small sentiments. So there's the inside. Then I'm gonna bring over my white. This is where my focal point is going to be for my card. And I'm going to use Cinnamon Cider to stamp my flower pot. I almost called it a coffee pot. It's a flower pot. And I love the depth you get from that stamp. It's just fantastic. And then I'm gonna stamp the plant in the flower pot. And because it's photopolymer on a clear block, I can see right through to where I need to line up my stamp. Now, while I'm here, I'm going to use the same inks and stamp my envelope with my plant as well. I always like to accent my envelopes just a bit. I'm gonna put my ink away before I damage something. And then stamp that. Doesn't that look cute? I just love it. All right, so that's all the stamping I need to do for my card. I'm gonna put those away. And now we'll do some more assembly. So bring your card base back over. I'm gonna start with my sentiment panel for the inside. And again, watch those corners. Oop. Our Stampin' Seal Plus, which is what I'm using tonight, has segmented pieces of tape. And so if you run off the edge a little bit, it's really easy to fold them back over, which I like. It's also a really nice strong adhesive, which we're gonna need in a minute for assembling the front of the card. So this just gets put in between your panels. That's probably the trickiest thing you're gonna do, is try to line that up. And I got another pencil mark there to erase. So now I'm going to flip to the front of the card and I'm going to position my stamped piece. Again, watch your corners. This one is a little bit easier to position than that inside panel because you've got your score lines to use as your guide. Just leave a little border and try to get it as centered as possible. And then straight across the top. There we go. Now, if you like the card the way it is, you can skip this next step. It's totally up to you, but I want to add an accent. So that's where our Designer Series paper comes in. So I'm going to take this print of Designer Series paper and put it on the corner. But you can see, this was my original rectangle. It's not going to fit here unless I turn it over. So that's why we had to make two, so that I have one each going the right direction. which I somehow managed to mess up, but that's okay. There we go. Ha. But then you'll have 2 remaining pieces that you can use on another card. So one more time with your adhesive and those little corners. And as I said, you can skip this step if you don't want this little accent. And then I'll show you how to finish off the card. Now, this next step is another optional step as well. Whoop. Got a little glue peeking out there. Let's fix that. It's up to you whether you want to secure this or not. You can just fold your card, sign it, and pop it in your envelope like this. But I personally like to seal this down. So I'm going to open the card back up. And this is where you have to be particularly careful with glue placement, because you don't want glue hanging out and gluing your card somewhere you didn't intend it to be. So I like to stick to my score lines and up this way towards the top on the card. And my adhesive totally decided to misbehave here. Oh, all right, hang on. Here we go. So a good strong adhesive like our Stampin' Seal Plus is good. And you can put your glue on that seam, and then you're going to want a little glue here as well. But on this one, you want to go further back here because this panel shows more. But if you don't use a strong glue or adhesive, it's going to pop out. So let me see here if I can get this last panel to cooperate. There we go. Always a hiccup. All right, so now I've got that really anchored in place and it doesn't move when I open the card. And that's just the look I prefer. It's totally up to you whether you glue that down or not. Just to finish off the front of this card, I'm going to add a bow out of our Early Espresso suede trim. Nothing too big because our flower pot isn't too large. And I really thought this espresso trim went well with the subtle floral on the card. I'm going to take a glue dot and put that on the back of my bow. And then put that here on the front of the flower pot. Give that a press. And then really this is lovely the way it is, but I wanted to add just a little bit of embellishment. So I have some champagne rhinestones that I'm going to put a couple on the card. Let's see. Whoop. And I'm using my Take Your Pick tool so that they're not stuck to my fingernails. Sometimes these little gems like to get away from you, like this one. You can add 3, you can add 5, you can add 50. It's totally up to you. All right, so here is my finished Aerofold card. So you do have options outside of a stamped image and embossed panels. The card that inspired this is actually one that I was given, and this person, and I'm sorry, I don't know who designed the card, but this is what inspired me because I knew I had to learn how to make this technique. They left the card open, and on their inside they used 2 of the tailored tag punches. I thought this was unique, but I don't like it for this style card because I want a little more room to write. I think I am going to use this idea on another card, but I just wanted to show that to you. And also, they took their edges, and rather than putting a piece of designer series paper here, they took a darker ink and a fingertip dauber and just sponged some ink just along these 2 edges on each corner, just to kind of accent that card a little bit. So that's another option for you. You can also use more designer series paper and less stamped images. For this one, instead of the 2 different pieces of cardstock, I took 1 piece of Designer Series paper, measuring 5 by 4, and I cut that into the triangle, and then I used the main triangle for the front, and then those 2 side triangles for the inside. I didn't go with a panel here on the inside, just stamped my sentiment, and I used stamped images that I fussy cut for accents to the front. And then I was feeling kind of beachy this week, so this is another card using mostly Designer Series paper, but instead of just stamped images, I took 2 of the scalloped rectangles from the Stitched So Sweetly die set, layered them together with my sentiment, and then added the accents of the smaller seashells. And I left this one blank inside. And then one more to show you. Just another little option. This is a little fun card. This is from our Joyful Life stamp set, which is new and I've been dying to play with. So I stamped this little happy guy, gave him the accent stamp around, colored him with my blends, pulled in the colors from the Designer Series paper, and then I thought the card needed a little something, so I added some of those champagne rhinestones in graduated sizes down the flaps. So you really do have a lot of options when you are putting together cards like this, whether you use stamped images or Designer Series paper. So have fun. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make this Aerofold card. If you don't have a demonstrator that you're currently working with and would like a copy of our current catalogs, please feel free to get in touch and I'd be happy to send them to you. I would love it if you would subscribe to this YouTube channel. I post videos here usually twice a week. And if you are a fan of Facebook and live videos, you can hop on over there to The Faithful Stamper and follow me there for more crafting tips and projects. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care and happy crafting.